As they marched off to the battlefields in Flanders, no one in the ranks, apart from veterans of the Boer War, realized what lay ahead of them. Even those same veterans did not realize the horrors they would soon see. The whole Western Front by 1917 had bogged down completely in a stalemate of mud, blood, disease, and quite simply desperation. There had to be an end to the great offensives which were supposed to break the enemy lines and send him packing, but instead resulted merely in even higher piles of corpses hanging on the old barbed wire. The artillery, machine guns and mortars simply made any form of mobile warfare impossible. It was a total deadlock until a new weapon which would revolutionize warfare for the rest of the century emerged from the smoke. It was, of course, the tank. The first tanks were British, and the very name tank was a code name to cover their real function. In fact, their inspiration came from naval circles, and to begin with, they were called land ships. But that might have given the game away to the Germans. The French soon had their own tanks too, and the Germans made much use of captured ones, but only came up with one very unwieldy design of their own. But warfare has always been a technological struggle, and from the very moment the first tanks appeared, the new challenge was to find countermeasures, because ordinary rifles and hand grenades were no solution. The anti-tank mission had been born. Another totally different mission began in the aftermath of the First World War. Adolf Hitler had a dream of a world which would be dominated by men of Germanic stock. Through a mixture of hate-filled propaganda directed against non-Aryan races, plus promises of a return to the unified Germany which Bismarck had created, where law and order rather than anarchy prevailed, he won enough voters round to the National Socialist Party to become appointed Chancellor in 1933. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, Hitler's obsession with racial purity and the superiority of the so-called Aryan people would unleash a conflict more wide-ranging and catastrophic than what was then called the Great War of 1914 to 1918 had been. After Hitler's accession to power, the German armaments industry was put into high gear. Alongside aircraft and U-boats, tanks assumed a high priority. Besides these, much thought and development was also devoted to the problem of coping with enemy tanks in the future war, which Hitler fondly imagined his Germanic legions would win. After the nearly bloodless takeovers of the Rhineland, Austria and Czechoslovakia, Hitler entered into an unholy pact with Stalin, the premier of Soviet Russia, to carve up Poland between them. This would put the separate territory of East Prussia back within German national borders. The campaign began before dawn on September 1st, 1939, with a massive aerial bombardment. Within 2 days, the Polish Air Force had been destroyed, and the leading tanks of the German 3rd, 4th, 8th, 10th and 14th Armies were pressing towards the gates of Warsaw. The Poles had no defense against this new form of warfare and threw away the cream of their mounted cavalry in fruitless charges. The tanks were invulnerable to rifle or machine gun fire and simply swept everything before them. The last pocket of resistance collapsed on October the 5th. By this time, though, Britain and France had already declared war and were mobilizing rapidly. After a brief lull, the German panzer struck again in the west. Belgium, Denmark and Holland fell quickly, and then came the Battle of France. Both the British and French had tanks which were better armoured than the German ones, and the only answer to these proved to be the 88mm anti-aircraft gun. Throughout the war, the 88 remained a bogeyman to Allied tank crews, since right to the end it proved capable of defeating almost any tank. In 1941, Hitler invaded his former ally, Soviet Russia. This, as it turned out, was his biggest mistake, because the sheer size of the country, as well as almost unlimited manpower and industrial resources, combined to wear down and ultimately defeat the might of the Panzer divisions. The Russians also had better tanks. The standard German anti-tank gun at the beginning of the war was the little 37mm PAK 35 and 36. This could only penetrate just over an inch of sloped armour plate at 500 yards range, and soon earned itself the nickname of the Army's door knocker. Large calibers and high muzzle velocities were soon in demand, and German industry was quick to develop a whole new range of guns for the anti-tank mission. The smallest of these was the 50mm PAK 38, which could pierce 2 inches of armour at 1,000 yards. Then came the 75mm PAK 40, able to penetrate 4 inches of armour at 500 yards, more than enough to blow a hole in an American Sherman or Russian T-34 tank. This gun was quickly mounted on old tank hulls to give it greater mobility, giving birth to the concept of the tank destroyer. The anti-tank guns were effectively supported by another gun originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, the quick-firing 20mm Flak 38. This only had limited armour-piercing capability, but was useful for shooting up enemy anti-tank gun and artillery crews, as well as unarmoured vehicles and infantry tank hunter teams. The anti-tank mission expanded as the need for anti-tank teams became more and more obvious. With a horizontal range of about 3,000 yards, the little 20mm Flak was well able to keep enemy anti-tank gun crews from getting too close. Because early German tanks only carried relatively light armament, German designers came up with another new concept. This was the assault gun. The basic chassis of a Panzer III or IV tank was adapted to carry a larger, more effective anti-tank gun in a contoured superstructure instead of a turret. Not only were these more effective tank destroyers than most early tanks, they could be produced much more quickly. Their principal drawback was that the gun obviously had limited traverse, so the vehicle had to be pointing in the right direction to engage the enemy. This made assault guns vulnerable to attack from the flanks and rear, so they normally operated in concert with tanks and infantry anti-tank teams. In fact, by 1944, production of assault guns and tank destroyers was running at such a high rate that most German panzer regiments had a virtual 50-50 balance of tanks and self-propelled guns. In the defensive battles in Normandy after D-Day, assault guns really came into their own. Having lower silhouettes than most tanks, they were easier to conceal in the hedgerows and narrow tree-lined lanes. In this type of warfare, lacking a turret was less of a drawback than it was on the wide-open Russian steppes, and Allied tank crews learned to treat the assault guns with caution and respect. Most by this time had high-velocity 75mm guns, which could easily take out an Allied Sherman tank at normal combat ranges. Their low-profile hulls also offered difficult targets to Allied anti-tank gunners and were well designed to deflect solid armour-piercing rounds. the Eastern Front, where the Russians were rapidly closing in upon the borders of Germany itself, assault guns helped stem the tide. Although they had been designed originally, as their name implies, to help achieve breakthroughs during attacks, their crews found they were well adapted to breaking up enemy tank attacks, and hundreds of Russian T-34s were lost to accurate German gunnery. The supreme tank destroyer of the war, although only built in small numbers, was the Jag Tiger. This used the hull and chassis of the Tiger II, but with a fixed superstructure instead of a turret. Into this was mounted the last and most powerful anti-tank gun of the war, the 128mm PAK-44. This could penetrate nearly 10 inches of armor at 1,000 yards and nearly 7 inches at 3 times that range. Moreover, the Jag Tiger was itself protected by frontal armor up to 10 inches thick, making it completely invulnerable to any Allied anti-tank gun. The Jag Tiger was, though, a last-ditch measure produced in desperation and had no effect on the outcome of the war. At the completely opposite end of the scale, the Germans were early pioneers in the use of light, infantry-portable anti-tank weapons. The first of these was the Panzerfaust, or armored fist. This was a simple metal tube containing an explosive charge to propel a large, hollow-charged grenade into the side of an enemy tank. Although its range was little better than 30 yards, it was a devastating weapon in trained hands. Even more effective was the Panzer or armored battle axe. Copied from American bazookas captured in North Africa in 1942, it comprised a hollow tube fitted with a simple pistol grip coupled to an electrical firing circuit. It needed a team of 2 men to operate, the gunner himself and the loader who inserted the 88mm rocket projectiles from the rear before rolling clear of the backblast. The Panzer could knock out an Allied tank at nearly 150 yards range. Its biggest drawback was the cloud of smoke and dust from the backblast, which gave away the crew's position to the enemy. The biggest advantage shared by the Panzerfaust, Panzerschek, and the smaller caliber American bazooka was that they were cheap and simple to produce and were manufactured in literally hundreds of thousands. The other economical device which was produced in countless millions was the anti-tank mine. These pressure-operated hollow-charge weapons were sown in fields designed to drive enemy tanks into killing grounds where anti-tank guns could take them in flank. Although they were normally laid by hand, the Germans also devised a mine plough to dig a shallow trench in order to speed up the process. Like many other things, this was something of a last-ditch measure from the German army. As the Allies pushed into Germany from east and west in 1944, elderly reservists, as well as young teenage boys, were hastily trained in the use of the Panzerfaust and sent out on useless missions to avert the inevitable end. The Germans were not alone, of course, in developing anti-tank weapons. One of the most effective of these throughout the war was the Soviet 76mm field gun, which would fire armor-piercing as well as high-explosive rounds. The Germans adapted thousands of captured examples to fire their own 75mm ammunition. Apart from pioneering the use of man-portable anti-tank weapons, such as the bazooka, the United States Army also developed a range of dedicated tank destroyer vehicles typified by the M10. As with the German assault guns, the basic idea was to mount a more powerful gun that could be fitted into a tank turret, but using essentially the same hull. Unlike German tank destroyers, the American ones did have fully traversing turrets, but these were only lightly armoured and were open-topped, making crews vulnerable to enemy artillery and mortar fire. Minefields were not a German or Russian prerogative. When the Western Allies landed on the European mainland, first in Italy in 1943, and then in France the following year, there was a desperate need to protect the vulnerable beachheads against counterattack. Until the Allies had established a firm foothold and begun expanding their perimeter inland, there was always the possibility that a strong German riposte could throw them back into the sea, as very nearly happened at Anzio. Further protection was given by artillery zeroed in on the minefields to deter German mine-clearing teams. Mine clearing itself was one of the Allies' biggest headaches, particularly in Italy, where the Germans established themselves in a string of fortified lines bisecting the width of the country. Electrical mine detectors could locate most of them, but some had casings made of non-magnetic materials. These took a heavy toll of Allied armour because the Sherman's floor plates were only half an inch thick. A more effective method of dealing with them was the flail, a tank fitted with a rapidly revolving drum at the front. This had lengths of steel chain fixed to it, which exploded the mines in the tank's path. Unfortunately, flail tanks were not always available, and the infantry had to resort to more conventional methods. Removing the fuses from mines was a nerve-wracking experience demanding steady hands, but it saved hundreds of lives. The Normandy coastline, part of Hitler's Fortress Europe, was also liberally strewn with German mines planted under the direction of Erwin Rommel, who knew that once the Allies got ashore in force, the war would be lost. A quicker method of disposing of the mine menace had to be found, and the answer was simple: blow them up from a safe distance. After this, the engineers would use white tape to mark out safe paths for the infantry and following vehicles to tread along. By far the most effective anti-tank weapon to emerge as the war progressed was the ground attack aircraft. Rocket-firing Royal Air Force Typhoons and United States Army Air Force Thunderbolts quickly perfected techniques of dealing with any German tanks which foolishly exposed themselves. The aircraft scoured the countryside of northwest France after D-Day, and no German road or rail vehicle was immune to the sudden death which rained out of the sky. The 6-inch warheads on the aircraft's rockets could destroy any tank with ease, and a new mission profile was developed called cab rank. As this implies, the aircraft simply circled until a customer on the ground radioed for assistance, then they would pounce. As the German armies in Normandy tried to flee once the Allies had achieved a breakthrough, they were battered by incessant airstrikes, and over 5,000 vehicles were destroyed. It was even greater destruction from the air which finally ended the Second World War in August 1945. Atomic bombs over the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki finally brought Japanese capitulation, and the 6-year struggle was over. More than anything else, though, the previous long drawn-out days had proved that air power was a deciding factor on the battlefield. In the early days of the Cold War between Russia and the West, the jet fighter was seen as the ultimate arbiter of success. The Soviet MiG-21, with high supersonic capability, was originally built as a short-range interceptor to shoot down NATO bombers. Later versions were modified to carry free-flight rockets in the anti-tank role. With the MiG-23 and its dedicated low-level attack version, the MiG-27, the Soviet Union brought the ground support fighter to a new level of sophistication in the last quarter century of the millennium. The MiG-21 had limited endurance, being designed for very fast, short-range missions. With variable geometry wings, the MiG-23 and 27 have much greater and more economical loiter time over the battlefield. They can extend their wings to give greater lift, so they can carry a heavier weapons load for many more miles. That load could include 250 or 1,000-pound bombs, cluster bombs for aerial denial and attacking enemy infantry, air-to-air missiles to defend themselves against opposing fighters, and pods of free-flight rockets for attacking tanks. This multi-role capability makes the MiG-23 one of the most successful combat aircraft of the post-war era, alongside the American F-4 Phantom, and many are still in use with client nations around the world. The same is also true of the Russian Mil-24 ground support helicopter. Originally designed as a troop carrier for the airborne assault mission, it was also intended that the stubby wings, which generate extra lift, to take some of the load off the rotor, would be useful weapons platforms. Because of the role it was originally designed for, the Mil-24, codenamed Hind by NATO, is much larger than more modern dedicated anti-tank helicopters. Despite this, for a long time it was by far the fastest military helicopter in service anywhere in the world, while its crews appreciate both the armor plating, which helps protect them from ground fire, and the infrared suppressed engines, which present a small target to heat-seeking missiles. The Marquis Hind is intended to range along the flanks of an armored assault to protect it, and the aircrew work in close collaboration with the tanks on the ground. Although the helicopter doesn't have what is now called nap-of-the-earth capability, allowing it to wait in ambush for an enemy tank, its high speed and ability to fire either multiple salvos of free-flight rockets or guided anti-tank missiles makes it a superb weapon during a fast-moving attack. At completely the other end of the scale, the German PAH-1 is both the smallest and the slowest anti-tank helicopter in service and is totally unarmored. It makes up for this by being extremely agile and having long endurance, which allow it to wait in ambush behind a tree line, then pop up to fire its wire-guided missiles. These are aimed using a sight mounted on the helicopter's roof, so the only part of the aircraft visible to the enemy is the rotor hub, which is a very small target. The helicopter can also maneuver to a limited extent while the missile is in flight, since all the operator has to do is keep the crosshairs centered on the target to ensure a hit. The PAH-1 can fire either the French Hot or the American Tau missile, both of which are very effective against conventional steel armor. They are unlikely, though, to do much damage to a main battle tank fitted both with the Chobham-style laminated armor and reactive armor plates, which dissipate the effect of hollow charge warheads. The type selected as replacement for the PAH-1 and also for the Gazelle, operated in the same role by the French, is a collaborative venture by Eurocopter which was created to combine the helicopter's interests of aerospatiale and MBB. This advanced anti-tank type is known to the French and Germans as the Tigre and Tiger respectively, and is a highly capable machine offering high performance, good maneuverability, and the combination of advanced electronics and weapons. The weapon system is based on the use of the Trigat or Hot 2 anti-tank missiles carried externally under the stub wing and aimed with the aid of a mass-mounted sight fitted with stabilized sensors. The underwing hardpoints can also carry cannon and machine gun pods or multi-tube rocket launchers, and there are wingtip positions for up to 4 short-range AAMs used in the self-protection and escort roles. The pilot and gunner are seated in tandem with the unusual arrangement of the pilot ahead of and below the gunner in separate cockpits, and the two men have at their disposal comprehensive flight and targeting systems. Survivability was high on the design team's agenda, and the combination of a twin-engine power plant and a 4-blade rotor provides excellent performance. The first post-war fixed-wing aircraft designed expressly for the anti-tank mission, and still one of the best, is the Fairchild A-10 Thunderbolt II. It is literally built around a 30mm 7-barreled Gatling gun, itself as big as a saloon car. This gives such a phenomenal rate of fire and muzzle velocity that a tank's armor simply disintegrates under the impact. The aircraft can also carry pods of free-flight rockets, bombs or missiles. The whole concept of a slow-flying tactical weapons carrier, able to survive over a battlefield by flying very low and carrying special armor and duplicated control systems, has been a matter of heated debate for years. What cannot be denied is the Thunderbolt's devastating punch in the anti-tank mission. Apart from its gun, its most potent weapon is the AGM-65 Maverick missile, which has a 125-pound warhead capable of penetrating all known armor. Early versions of this missile were guided by a television camera in the nose, but the latest variant uses thermal imaging, allowing it to be fired by day or night under any weather conditions. It is a fire-and-forget missile, meaning that once launched, the aircraft's pilot can maneuver at will. One of the longest-serving and most familiar helicopters in the world is the American Huey Cobra, which first saw action in Vietnam. The AH-1S version is powered by an Avro-Lycoming turboshaft engine, giving a top speed of around 140 miles an hour. Not particularly fast by modern standards, or even in comparison with the Russian Hind, which can manage nearly 200. Basic weapons fit is 8 TOW missiles, the acronym standing for Tube-Launched, Optically Tracked, Wire-Guided, which we'll come back to in a minute. The only drawback to this system for the helicopter's 2 crewmen is that the operator has to keep the target in his sights until the missile strikes. This exposes them to enemy ground fire, and if the helicopter is badly damaged or destroyed, the missile can go anywhere. However, the crew do have a chin-mounted fast-firing rotary 20 or 30mm cannon, which is guaranteed to keep the enemy's heads down. The much more modern McDonnell Douglas AH-64 Apache also has a gun. In this case, the Hughes 30mm chain gun with over 1,000 rounds of ammunition, providing sustained fire for up to 2 minutes. It can swivel through 360 degrees and is aimed by a sight in the operator's helmet. As he moves his head, the cameras in the nose automatically look in the same direction. The chain gun is not itself an anti-tank weapon, but it can inflict serious damage on more lightly armored targets, such as infantry personnel carriers. Both crew members have their helmet sights, which means that one of them can concentrate on threats, while the other selects targets for the 16 Hellfire missiles carried on underwing pylons. This in itself is twice the normal load of any other helicopter and makes the Apache the current ultimate in anti-tank capability, as was proved during the Gulf War in 1991. The Hellfire itself is laser-guided, the target being illuminated by another aircraft or an operator on the ground. Once launched, the operator can forget it. The missiles can even be ripple-fired against several targets using coded laser beams, and they have a range of over 3 miles. The basic drawback of the original Apache was that all the sensors were in the nose, meaning that the aircraft could not really fly nap-of-the-earth missions and had to expose itself to enemy retaliation. The latest version, however, is the Longbow Apache, fitted with a bulbous target acquisition and designation system on top of a mast protruding above the rotor hub. This allows the Apache to operate, in effect, from a hull-down position. All the enemy can see, if he has sharp eyesight, is the longbow dome, much the same as with the German PAH-1. This, coupled with titanium armor protection, similar to that in the Fairchild A-10, greatly enhances the helicopter's survivability over the increasingly lethal modern battlefield. Another very versatile aircraft for the ground support and anti-tank mission is the unique British Harrier, used by naval as well as land-based squadrons, including the United States Marine Corps. The Harrier uses thrust from its Rolls-Royce turbofan engine vectored through nozzles to give vertical takeoff and landing capability. This means that the Harrier does not need a runway, although it will use one if available to save fuel. It can, however, operate from clearings in woods or even from city streets. This is its most valuable asset in the anti-tank mission. Although it is not supersonic, the Harrier is 3 times as fast as any helicopter and can therefore respond to a request for help from the ground forces much more quickly. Although the Harrier's principal mission is not anti-tank, it can carry pods for free-flight rockets which have impressive armor-piercing capability, or use the laser designator in its nose to drop smart bombs with pinpoint accuracy, as was proved in the recent conflict against the Serbs in Kosovo. The Harrier is also a very capable dogfighter, as Argentinian pilots discovered in the Falklands, and carries air-to-air missiles to protect itself from counterattack while supporting the troops on the ground. Britain's dedicated anti-tank aircraft is the Westland Lynx helicopter, which was the first in the world to be able to roll or loop the loop. This extraordinary agility is one of its principal assets on the modern battlefield. Although it is unarmoured, it can jink rapidly to avoid enemy ground fire and can pull higher G in a turn than any other military helicopter, allowing it to evade hostile aircraft with ease. In its primary anti-tank role, the Lynx carries 8 TOW wire-guided missiles on external pylons. Unlike the Hellfire, carried by the Apache and Huey Cobra, TOW has to be guided optically to its target, and each missile has to be aimed and fired individually using the roof-mounted sight. To balance this drawback, the Lynx can carry an extra 8 missiles in its relatively spacious cabin, so the crew can land and reload anywhere rather than having to return to base. That same cabin can also carry up to 10 infantrymen, although a more aggressive option is 3 gun crews with Milan anti-tank missiles and their launchers. Using its high speed of just under 200 miles per hour and wonderful maneuverability, the Lynx can deposit the anti-tank teams anywhere on the battlefield and leave them to get on with the job. Milan is produced by Euro Missile and is lighter, less complicated, and far less expensive than TOW, which helps account for the fact that it is now used by nearly 40 armies around the world. Milan is more usually deployed by 2-man teams carried into battle in armoured personnel carriers, although it can also be roof-mounted on a wide variety of vehicles to give them an anti-tank capability as well. One man carries a pair of missiles in their sealed launch tubes, while the other carries the firing post. This normally comprises an optical sight, infrared tracker, and tripod mounting, although a passive light intensifier for use at night is an optional extra. Milan has a range of just over a mile and, being subsonic, a flight time of nearly 13 seconds. However, its 115mm hollow charge warhead, which ignites when the long-nosed probe makes contact with the target, can penetrate over 3 feet of conventional armour plate. It can, therefore, blast a hole right through any known tank, except those fitted with composite and reactive armour. Another infantry portable anti-tank missile in the same class, although it is unguided, is the Swedish Carl Gustaf. In many respects, this simple, lightweight weapon is nothing more than a more advanced version of the wartime German Panzerfaust. The missile itself only weighs 5 pounds, but it has a range of half a mile compared with the Panzerfaust's 50 yards and can penetrate up to 15 inches of steel armour plate. This is not enough to deal with composite or reactive armour, especially on a modern tank's front. So infantry tank-busting teams normally try to wait concealed in ambush until a tank has passed, then hit it in flank or rear. The system, known as BIL for Bofors, Infantry Light and Lethal, is a more recent Swedish development with similar characteristics to Milan, but it is smaller and weighs less, giving the 2-man teams more possibility of remaining undetected until a tank has passed them. Let's see how they operate. A tank's frontal armour these days is almost certain to be too strong for the missile's comparatively small warhead. So they let the tank pass, steal out from the woods, and let fly at the rear with the 9-pound missile. Many modern tanks carry their ammunition here, so it's a good spot to hit. Attacking tanks from overhead is even more effective, and Bill automatically fires its warhead downwards as it passes over the vehicle. Fortunately, this target tank is unmanned, but it does have a full load of ammunition and fuel, and the results of a hit by a Bill missile are spectacular. The warhead of Euromissile Hot weighs as much alone as the whole Bill missile, and the system is not man-portable, but is fitted to a variety of vehicles and helicopters. Once launched, fins open out, and the missile spins in flight to give it stability, with its guiding wire paying out behind it. All the operator has to do is keep the crosshairs on his magnifying sight centered on the target, and a hit is assured. Like Davy Crockett, a skilled operator can put missile after missile straight onto the same spot. Hot missiles are fitted to several French and German vehicles, such as the Jaguar or Panhard armoured car. It is also mounted in a retractable launching module called Mephisto to the French VAB. This four-wheel vehicle is basically an armoured personnel carrier, and to an enemy tank crew doesn't look much of a threat until the launcher is raised and the missile fired. The operator uses a periscopic sight to identify his target first and can fire from a hull-down position. Once the target has been located, the Mephisto launcher is elevated and the missile locked on, using an infrared sensor to detect heat from the tank's engine for even greater accuracy. The most widely used anti-tank missile in the Western world, though, is the Hughes BGM-71 TOW. Over 500,000 have been manufactured in 3 basic versions with further upgrades in the pipeline. It is the single most important anti-tank weapon in the NATO armoury. Although not man-portable, because the system weighs too much, it can be fitted to light vehicles such as the American Jeep-like Hummer, as well as to armoured fighting vehicles and helicopters. The system first saw action in Vietnam and has been used in just about every conflict since then. The baseline TOW Mark I had a conventional hollow charge warhead. In TOW2, an improved explosive compound was coupled with a long-nose probe to make sure the war had exploded the correct distance for maximum penetration of an enemy tank's armor. TOW3 not only has the capability to hit its target from above, where a tank's armor is weakest, but also has tandem warheads which explode in sequence to defeat reactive armor. The missile has a range of some 1,000 yards, but at that distance will take 15 seconds to reach its target, a long time on a battlefield with people shooting back at you. A supersonic radio-guided version is under development. In the American Army, the principal TOW carrier is the M3 Bradley, which equips cavalry reconnaissance squadrons. Each vehicle has a pair of turret-mounted launchers and carries 10 reloads in the hull, so although the Bradley is not dedicated to the anti-tank mission, it is very capable. The Hellfire laser-guided missile, fitted to the Apache attack helicopter, can also be adapted for use on the ground, and the Swedish Army, concerned about potentially hostile submarines seen frequently close inshore, even adapted it for the anti-shipping role. More conventionally, a pair of Hellfires can be mounted on a vehicle as small as the 1-ton Hummer. Because the missile relies on the target being illuminated by a friendly laser, the carrying vehicle can operate from a concealed position out of enemy sight. The missile's supersonic speed carries it unerringly to its target in seconds, and total destruction is guaranteed. The Canadian Armed Forces operate the system called ADATS. This is a unique weapon because the name means Air Defense Anti-Tank System. No other missile is designed to knock out primarily aircraft, but also heavy battle tanks. ADATS is manufactured by Oerlikon Berl of Switzerland with licensing through Martin Marietta of the USA. The turret carries 8 ready-to-fire, high-velocity laser-guided missiles. Ranging is by laser, and the missile rides a deadly accurate beam out to over 5 miles to the target. ADATS can be fired in very rapid sequence. ADATS is just as deadly to armor. Acquiring the target and aiming, the launcher takes less than a second. Then, at 2,000 miles per hour, the missile blasts straight to the target, sending it up in a ball of flame. As these test shots prove, the missile can penetrate extremely heavy armor. During the Gulf War in 1991, high-tech weapon systems, such as the Harrier, soon destroyed most of Saddam Hussein's aircraft and tanks. United States Marine Corps AV-8B Harrier II jump jets provided close ground support. Their new, larger carbon fiber wings gave extra lift and payload capacity for free-flight rocket pods, bombs, and air-to-air missiles. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was there as well, and even though they only had first-generation Maverick missiles with television guidance, they were able to inflict terrible damage on the Russian-built tanks of the Iraqi Republican Guard. For them, there was simply no hiding place. Even the tiny Kuwaiti Air Force provided some aerospatial gazelles in the close support and anti-tank roles. The one helicopter which really proved master of the anti-tank mission in the Gulf was the McDonnell Douglas Apache. Able to operate by night almost as easily as under the hot desert sun, it was able to take out targets such as this forward observation post even before the Republican Guards realized their enemy was anywhere near them. A convoy of tanks and other vehicles provided a sitting target for Apache helicopters. One Hellfire missile took out the leading tank, the second destroyed the one at the back to prevent retreat, and the Hughes chain gun made short work of the unarmoured vehicles in the middle. It has been said that smart weapons won the war against Saddam Hussein, but it must be remembered that it takes smart men to design them and brave as well as smart men to operate them effectively. The thousands of smashed and burnt-out vehicles and long columns of prisoners marked the end of Saddam Hussein's dreams of conquest and thoroughly vindicated all the hard work and money which goes into developing the technology for the modern anti-tank mission.